Ananya and Arjun's fairy tale wedding turned into a nightmare no one could have imagined. On their wedding night, a hidden secret unleashed a tragedy that would shock the world. The city was alive with celebration, buzzing with the excitement of a wedding that seemed destined to be talked about for years. Ananya, the bride, walked through halls adorned with golden lights and delicate flowers, her heart beating faster with each step. Every detail of the ceremony had been planned to perfection, from the intricate designs of her silk sari to the carefully arranged tables overflowing with exotic delicacies. Guests arrived in limousines and luxury cars, their eyes reflecting awe at the grandeur of the event. Families mingled, laughter floated in the air, and the scent of fresh roses mixed with the soft aroma of incense, creating a dreamlike atmosphere. Arjun, her husband, appeared every bit the image of power and wealth, dressed in a perfectly tailored sherwani that glimmered under the chandeliers. He smiled at the guests, exuding charm and authority, yet behind his composed exterior was a man who expected control in every aspect of life. Ananya, young and vibrant, felt both admiration and unease. Though the celebration felt magical, a quiet tension tugged at the corners of her mind. She had worked so hard to reach this moment, yet she carried a secret that could shatter everything. The audience saw only a perfect union, a fairy tale come to life. But the truth hidden beneath her calm exterior threatened to turn joy into tragedy. As she sat among family and friends, her fingers trembling slightly while adjusting her bridal jewelry, Ananya wondered how long the illusion of happiness could last. She smiled, laughed, and posed for photographs, all while feeling the weight of her hidden truth pressing down. The grand wedding, sparkling and flawless on the outside, was about to become the stage for a story darker than anyone could imagine. Despite the dazzling celebrations and the endless attention from guests, Ananya's mind was far from the glittering halls around her. The joy that should have accompanied her wedding night was clouded by a secret she had carried silently for over a year. She had been diagnosed with HIV, a revelation that had shaken her world but that she had learned to live with through careful treatment and strict precautions. Every routine medical check, every dose of medication, had been followed with unwavering discipline. She had believed that with honesty and caution, she could live a normal life, perhaps even build a family one day. But tonight, that secret felt like a fragile glass in her hands, threatening to shatter with a single wrong move. Ananya moved gracefully among the guests, accepting compliments and smiling through the endless photographs. Her laughter was soft, almost mechanical, masking the storm brewing within. The whispers of relatives and friends about how perfect the couple looked only intensified her anxiety. Could she really maintain this facade forever? Would Arjun ever accept her if he knew the truth? Questions like knives pressed against her mind, cutting through the joy she tried so hard to feel. The luxurious mansion, with its sparkling chandeliers and endless corridors, seemed suddenly suffocating. Every glance at Arjun, confident and commanding, reminded her of the gulf between their worlds. He had been raised to expect perfection, control, and obedience, and she feared that her hidden reality would be a betrayal too heavy for him to bear. As night approached and the festivities wound down, a sense of foreboding settled over Ananya. The world outside celebrated her as a bride, but inside, she was acutely aware that the most important moment of her life, the wedding night, was laced with uncertainty, fear, and the knowledge that a single revelation could change everything forever. The mansion was a palace of wealth, a fortress where every corner whispered power and influence. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings so high they seemed to touch the sky, and walls were adorned with priceless paintings and intricate carvings. The floors gleamed as if polished by sunlight itself, reflecting the shimmering lights of gold-trimmed decor. Servants moved silently in the background, gliding through the grand hallways with a precision that suggested both training and fear. Every detail had been crafted to impress, to show that Arjun's world was untouchable, untarnished, and superior to anyone else's. Ananya wandered through the rooms, her fingers brushing against the velvet curtains, her eyes absorbing the endless displays of luxury. She felt like a small figure swallowed by a universe of wealth, both awed and intimidated. The grand staircase, the expansive gardens, the private pool. Everything screamed of privilege she had never known. Yet beneath the beauty, a chill lingered, an unspoken tension in the air. The mansion, magnificent as it was, carried an undercurrent of control. It was not just a home. It was a domain where every action could be watched, every movement judged. The servants, though polite and attentive, seemed distant, their eyes darting nervously whenever Arjun appeared. Ananya began to realize that this world was not just about wealth. It was about power, dominance, and absolute obedience. She felt a subtle pressure settle on her shoulders, a reminder that in this glittering palace, one misstep could carry consequences she could not predict. The contrast between the celebrations outside and the silent vigilance inside the mansion created a strange tension. Ananya, who had dreamed of a fairy tale life, now understood that the walls around her were not only gilded with gold. They were lined with invisible chains, holding both secrets and dangers she had yet to fully comprehend. The night had settled over the mansion, but sleep seemed impossible. Ananya tried to calm her racing thoughts, hoping the excitement and exhaustion of the wedding would ease her mind. Yet the secret she carried felt heavier than ever, pressing on her chest like a weight she could not escape. In a quiet corner of the bedroom, Arjun moved through the room, seemingly distracted by papers and personal belongings that had been left behind during the day's chaos. Without warning, his eyes landed on a medical report tucked discreetly in a drawer. The letters on the page revealed the truth Ananya had worked so hard to hide, her HIV status. Time seemed to slow. The room, once shimmering with soft lamplight, now felt like a cage closing in. Arjun's calm, composed expression shifted into something colder, darker. A storm of disbelief, fear, and anger surged through him, a dangerous combination that had been simmering beneath his controlled exterior. Ananya, unaware of what had been discovered, moved closer to the window to gaze at the city lights, hoping for comfort in their distant beauty. She did not notice the subtle change in the air, the tension that made every shadow seem sharper, every sound amplified. The mansion, which had earlier felt grand and protective, now felt suffocating, as if the walls themselves were pressing in with judgment. The revelation was more than just information. It was a fracture in the illusion of perfection that Arjun had built around himself. The thought of betrayal, of his image tarnished, consumed him entirely. In that quiet, opulent room, the first crack appeared in the night that should have been filled with celebration and intimacy. A secret long held was no longer hidden, and the consequences of that discovery would soon transform the dream wedding into a nightmare that no one could have anticipated. The moment of tension exploded without warning. The quiet opulence of the bedroom, once a sanctuary, became a stage for sudden chaos. Arjun's rage, ignited by the discovery of Ananya's secret, transformed the atmosphere instantly. Every corner of the lavish room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in as anger radiated from him. The glittering chandeliers no longer cast a warm glow. Their light felt harsh, exposing the truth of what was about to unfold. Ananya turned, sensing the change in energy before fully understanding it. Her heart raced, pounding against her ribcage like a warning drum. The fear she had quietly carried for months now surged to the surface. This was no longer about secrets or misunderstandings. It was about power, control, and consequences she could not negotiate. The grandeur around her, the silk sheets, the gold-trimmed mirrors, the delicate ornaments, suddenly felt cruelly ironic. They symbolized wealth and status, yet could not shield her from the violence that had entered the room. The first act of brutality was swift. In a blur, Ananya felt the force of his hands and the impact of betrayal translating into action. The room echoed with muffled sounds, a stark contrast to the celebration that had filled the mansion just hours earlier. Every movement, every breath, became a fight for survival. The servants, loyal yet terrified, remained in the shadows, their silence a testament to the fear that power can command. In that room, where dreams of happiness had once lived, the line between love and terror vanished. The evening that had promised a lifetime of joy now turned into a nightmare no one could have foreseen. In a matter of moments, the golden wedding night had transformed into a scene of unimaginable horror, setting the stage for a tragedy that would ripple far beyond the walls of the mansion. The night reached its darkest hour, and with it, the brutality escalated beyond anything Ananya could withstand. Every attempt to defend herself had been met with overwhelming force. The room, once filled with laughter, music, and celebration, had become a chamber of terror. The silk sheets and golden ornaments that had seemed so beautiful now lay scattered and broken, evidence of a nightmare erupting within the walls of opulence. Ananya's strength began to wane. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her body trembling from fear and exhaustion. She realized, in those fleeting moments of clarity, that the violence was unrelenting, that there was no escape within these gilded walls. The mansion, a symbol of wealth and power, was now a prison where status offered no protection. Each heartbeat felt like a countdown, each movement an impossible effort against the overwhelming force pressing down on her. The servants, still hidden in fear, could only listen. Their silence, forced by terror, underscored the isolation of the moment. Outside, the city lights continued to shine, unaware of the horror taking place inside. The contrast between the world celebrating life and the room filled with deathly chaos was stark and cruel. In the final moments, the inevitability of tragedy settled over the room. Ananya's dreams, hopes, and life were extinguished in an instant, leaving behind only silence and devastation. The golden chandeliers reflected the absence of joy, casting cold light on a scene that wealth could not hide, power could not excuse, and status could not justify. The night that had begun with promise, love, and celebration ended in a brutal, irreversible loss, marking the mansion forever with the shadow of a young bride's stolen life. The night reached its darkest hour, and with it, the brutality escalated beyond anything Ananya could withstand. Every attempt to defend herself had been met with overwhelming force. The room, once filled with laughter, music, and celebration, had become a chamber of terror. The silk sheets and golden ornaments that had seemed so beautiful now lay scattered and broken, evidence of a nightmare erupting within the walls of opulence. Ananya's strength began to wane. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her body trembling from fear and exhaustion. She realized, in those fleeting moments of clarity, that the violence was unrelenting, that there was no escape within these gilded walls. The mansion, a symbol of wealth and power, was now a prison where status offered no protection. Each heartbeat felt like a countdown, each movement an impossible effort against the overwhelming force pressing down on her. The servants, still hidden in fear, could only listen. Their silence, forced by terror, underscored the isolation of the moment. Outside, the city lights continued to shine, unaware of the horror taking place inside. The contrast between the world celebrating life and the room filled with deathly chaos was stark and cruel. In the final moments, the inevitability of tragedy settled over the room. Ananya's dreams, hopes, and life were extinguished in an instant, leaving behind only silence and devastation. The golden chandeliers reflected the absence of joy, casting cold light on a scene that wealth could not hide, power could not excuse, and status could not justify. The night that had begun with promise, love, and celebration ended in a brutal, irreversible loss, marking the mansion forever with the shadow of a young bride's stolen life. The mansion fell into an eerie silence after the fatal night. The grand halls that had once echoed with music, laughter, and chatter now felt hollow, as if the walls themselves mourned the loss within. The room where Ananya had met her tragic end was quickly sealed off, its door locked and curtains drawn, hiding the grim reality from the eyes of the world. The servants moved quietly through the corridors, their footsteps hushed, their faces pale with fear. Every glance toward the forbidden room carried a mixture of dread and helplessness. Outside, the celebrations had long ended, but the illusion of joy remained in the memories of guests who were unaware of the horror that had unfolded. The contrast between the glittering festivities and the grim silence inside the mansion made the tragedy feel even more surreal. It was a place where wealth and status had shielded the powerful, yet now those same walls seemed to trap a dark secret that refused to stay hidden forever. Rumors began to circulate, whispered quietly amongst servants and acquaintances. The story twisted and grew in the telling, as fear and speculation replaced certainty. Yet no one dared speak openly, afraid of the consequences of challenging a man with Arjun's influence. Each silence became a piece of the puzzle, each hesitant glance a silent witness to a night that had shattered lives. In the mansion, the aftermath of violence was visible in subtle ways. A chair overturned, a golden vase cracked, the faint scent of fear lingering in the air. The opulence that had once represented beauty and power now felt hollow, masking a darkness that money could not cleanse. The mansion stood as a chilling reminder that even in the most luxurious surroundings, human cruelty and tragedy could strike without warning, leaving only silence and shadows in their wake. In the days following the tragedy, the mansion became a maze of whispers, half-truths, and hidden fears. The household staff moved carefully, aware that a single misstep could draw the attention of the powerful man who ruled over their lives. Each servant's account was measured, rehearsed, and cautious, designed to protect themselves while keeping the horrific truth buried. Yet even as they tried to maintain the illusion of normalcy, the tension between silence and disclosure grew heavier with every passing hour. Arjun, outwardly composed, maintained an air of control, yet cracks in his carefully constructed image began to appear. The discovery of inconsistencies in the stories of those closest to him sparked doubt, suspicion, and fear. Private investigators and authorities, constrained by the weight of wealth and influence, had to navigate a labyrinth of lies. Every statement was double-checked, every testimony weighed against hidden motives, and every shadow in the mansion seemed to conceal yet another piece of the puzzle. Outside the walls, society began to stir with curiosity. The glamorous facade of wealth could no longer shield the family from attention. Reporters, neighbors, and acquaintances began piecing together fragments of the story, while social media and gossip carried whispers of scandal far beyond the confines of the mansion. The contrast between the glittering life Arjun portrayed and the darkness hidden behind closed doors became impossible to ignore. The mansion itself, once a symbol of pride and power, became a place of tension and suspicion. Gold and marble could not erase the traces of violence, nor could status prevent the slow seep of truth. The web of lies, once tight and controlled, began to unravel, revealing that even the most carefully guarded secrets are vulnerable. The tragedy that had begun in opulence was now entering a phase where every shadow, every hidden detail, and every unspoken fear threatened to expose the reality behind tea. Once the story began to leak, the world outside the mansion erupted with shock and outrage. Media outlets, always hungry for scandal, painted the tragedy in vivid, heartbreaking detail. Headlines screamed of betrayal, secrecy, and the dark consequences of wealth and power. Social media amplified the story, spreading images of the grand wedding, the opulent mansion, and the young bride who had lost her life in such a brutal and unexpected way. Public reaction was instantaneous and intense, with debates raging about morality, privilege, and the stigmas surrounding HIV. Ananya, once a private figure, had become the symbol of a broader social issue. Advocates and ordinary people alike discussed the dangers women face when trapped in powerful households and the harsh judgment often directed toward those living with HIV. Her story highlighted how fear, secrecy, and prejudice could combine into a deadly force, and how even the most protected lives could be vulnerable to sudden, violent outcomes. Meanwhile, the mansion remained a focal point of fear and fascination. Reporters and investigators gathered outside, photographing every detail and speaking to neighbors who had glimpsed fragments of the wedding and its aftermath. Inside, the household continued to move carefully, the staff aware that every word, every gesture, could fuel speculation or uncover the truth. Fear had become a constant companion, and the mansion, once a symbol of grandeur and control, now radiated tension, guilt, and scrutiny. The tragedy ignited public conversation on a scale that no one could have anticipated. It forced society to confront uncomfortable truths about status, secrecy, and the vulnerability of those who serve the powerful. Ananya's death, while deeply personal and private, had transformed into a catalyst for awareness, outrage, and reflection, a haunting reminder that even wealth and privilege cannot shield against human cruelty or societal reckoning. Despite Arjun's wealth and influence, the truth began to pierce the veil of power he had relied on. Investigators, relentless and meticulous, slowly pieced together evidence that had been hidden, ignored, or intentionally concealed. Every discrepancy in the staff's accounts, every overlooked detail in the mansion, and every fragment of the wedding night began to form a coherent narrative. The walls that had once protected Arjun's reputation could no longer shield him from the reach of justice. The investigation revealed the depth of control and fear that had pervaded the household. Servants, initially paralyzed by terror, began to cooperate once they understood the consequences of silence. Hidden documents, medical records, and subtle clues left behind in the chaos of that night became vital pieces of the puzzle. Each revelation chipped away at the carefully constructed image of perfection that Arjun had projected to the outside world. Public scrutiny added pressure to the legal process. Media outlets and social activists kept the story in the spotlight, demanding accountability and transparency. No longer could wealth and status obscure the brutal reality of what had occurred. The narrative shifted from rumor and speculation to documented fact, and Arjun's attempts to maintain control began to falter. As the investigation advanced, it became clear that the tragedy was more than a personal crime. It was a reflection of systemic issues surrounding power, secrecy, and the vulnerability of those living under the shadow of influence. Justice, though delayed, was steadily approaching. The mansion, once a fortress of unchecked authority, now symbolized exposure, accountability, and the undeniable power of truth. In the end, Arjun's wealth could not outrun the consequences of his actions, and the legacy of that horrific night began to unfold in a way that would ensure the world could not forget Ananya's story. Ananya's story did not end with her death. It became a catalyst for change, reflection, and awareness. Across the country, her tragedy sparked conversations about the dangers faced by women trapped in households ruled by wealth and power, and the persistent stigma surrounding HIV. Her life, though cut tragically short, became a symbol of both vulnerability and resilience, a reminder that silence and secrecy can have devastating consequences. Social campaigns and awareness programs emerged in the aftermath, aiming to protect women from abuse and educate communities about HIV. The discussion extended beyond legal frameworks, reaching into the hearts and minds of society. People began to question long-held assumptions about status, privilege, and morality. Ananya's story was no longer a private tragedy confined to the walls of a mansion. It became a public lesson in empathy, understanding, and justice. Inside the mansion, life gradually returned to a tense routine, but the echoes of that night lingered. Every corner held memories that money could not erase. Every room a silent witness to a cruelty that would not be forgotten. Arjun's attempts to restore normalcy could not undo the mark left on his household, his reputation, or the world's perception of his actions. The grandeur that had once shielded him now seemed hollow, a stark reminder that wealth cannot buy absolution. Ananya's legacy endured in ways that transcended tragedy. Laws were revisited, support networks strengthened, and public awareness grew. While her life had been stolen on a night that should have celebrated love, her story illuminated injustice, inspired change, and ensured that her memory would live on. In the end, the young bride who had entered a gilded palace carrying a secret had transformed the world around her, proving that even in death, truth and courage could shine brighter than gold.